This is the last in our series of Love Thy Neighbor as Thyself-y. The previous weeks have led to this moment of embarking on a journey that will challenge our natural inclinations and confront some of our deepest fears. Today we're going to delve into the profound teachings of justice found in Micah 6:8 and the radical command of Jesus to love our enemies as it's illustrated in Luke 6:27-36. We're going to explore the text with some raw honesty and a fierce commitment to uncover the very specific and critical divine dance that exists between this radical love of God that Luke speaks of regarding loving our enemies and the biblical restorative justice that Micah mandates. Navigating the rugged terrain of loving our enemies, all the while pursuing justice, is not the easy stuff of faith. And the only way that this can be done is by our own openness to be transformed on a personal level through what many throughout history have called the scandalous love of Christ, empowering us to become conduits for healing, justice, and reconciliation in a world that is crying out for good and to be transformed by love. These two texts for today beckon us to embrace an all-encompassing love that transcends boundaries and to exemplify the justice that sprouts forth from the deep compassion of our very being. Now, before we delve into loving our enemies, we need to first look at justice. What it is, what all it encompasses, and its connection to loving our enemies. We will never move to the place of truly being able to love our enemies in an honest and constructive way if we have not first addressed the issue of biblical and restorative justice. It becomes the foundation for understanding how to move forward to love someone that we would describe as our enemy. Micah 6:8 lays out a roadmap on our journey towards justice as a divine stirring of the pot, awakening us to the courage that it takes to go down this path. This is a path that God wants all of us on together. Yet it also encompasses something somewhat of an individual call to always be doing what is right in the sight of God, to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly before our God. Now, it is easy in our culture to think of justice more in terms of retribution or getting even. You hurt me, and I'll hurt you right back. You attack me, I'll come after you. That is not justice. That is revenge. The justice that Micah speaks of is God's justice. A justice that goes way beyond mere punishment. It encompasses restoring relationships, seeking righteousness, and working towards what the Jews knew as shalom, wholeness and peace in our world and our lives. The justice that God speaks of is one that we as individuals and as a community must actively seek in every corner of life, every corner of our community, every corner of our world, as we work towards the establishment of God's kingdom right here on earth. To live justly, we must be unafraid to confront injustice wherever it may be found, even among our enemies. This justice is not an abstract concept. It's the relentless pursuit of decency and restoration. This justice is truth-telling. It obliges us to courageously stand up against any person, organization, or system that dehumanizes, oppresses, or fosters hate. It sounds like a call to bear arms or rise up and strike out at all that we feel has hurt us or those we love or those who are on the margins. For so many people, they think the only way to get true justice is through some violent act, thoughts and words and attitudes. We probably know that feeling and desire. It feels like that is at least sometimes how we're wired to respond, to strike out, strike back. And if that task to do justice doesn't seem big enough, we're commanded to do it with mercy, or some translations say with loving kindness, with no violence or animosity. Are you kidding me? When we hate someone, and when we think someone's our enemy, it's easy to assume that God hates the same people we do. And when that happens, what we have effectively done as we have created God in our image, which is quite different than seeing our enemy as one created in the image of the very loving God that created us. To seek justice means that we're to walk intentionally in mercy, to act as conduits of God's grace, and to engage in the righteous work of healing brokenness. It invites us to seek understanding, compassion, and love, even for our enemies, recognizing their inherent worth as a fellow bearer of God's image. And what we discover is love and justice are actually bound together and become a dance that is grounded in restoring relationships, seeking wholeness, and bringing about systematic change, while never losing sight of the inherent dignity and worth of another person, of every person. And this was so evident and echoed in the life of Jesus. Mother Teresa captured it powerfully when she stated, "Justice without love is not justice, and love without justice is not love." The biblical justice is restorative in nature. Its goal is not vengeance or retribution, but rather restoration and reconciliation to relationships, both individually and communally, that have been broken by hate, greed, discrimination, oppression, exploitation. And the goal of true biblical justice is bringing healing and wholeness to individuals and to communities. It calls for addressing the root causes of injustice and working towards reconciling the parties, bringing about restoration. The Bible is clear that to stand for justice is to boldly stand in the gap and be advocates, showing compassion and mercy towards those who have been unjustly treated, to advocate for, to give voice to, and to provide care for and protection of the poor, widows, orphans, immigrants within a society. It's a commitment to strive individually and corporately to live and act in alignment with God's moral standards in all our dealings with one another, and to strive on a regular basis, on a daily basis, for moral integrity. This is challenging, to say the least. But Jesus does not mess around here. He clearly tells us as his followers that we are to love our enemies. That means that we seek God's best for them too. But in order for that to happen, we cannot continue to enable another person's injustice, but to seek their redemption and transformation. By responding with love, we emulate the character of a loving God, from whose grace we have all benefited. Jesus is telling us that I want the very best God has to offer you, my enemy. I also want the very best God has to offer me. And that's going to take grace and love and mercy. Sometimes my reaction is, "You've got to be kidding me, God. Do you know what that person did to me?" And the answer to that is Jesus saying to me, "Yes, I know." And I need to be reminded at times, as I'm guessing you do too, that Jesus' life and death reflect the ultimate embodiment of love for enemies. In his crucifixion, we see the transformative power of sacrificial love. Jesus forgave even those who nailed him to the cross, embodying a love that triumphs over hate, injustice, and violence. And it is in that radical love that we find the strength to follow in Jesus' footsteps. Martin Luther King knew something about being hated and having enemies. In a message from November 17th, 1957 to the people at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, he shared this powerful observation of the power of love in relationship to our enemies. Now, there's a final reason I think that Jesus says, love your enemies. It is this, that love has within it a redemptive power, and there is a power that eventually transforms individuals. That's why Jesus says, love your enemies. Because if you hate your enemies, you have no way to redeem and to transform your enemy. But if you love your enemies, you will discover that at the very root of love is the power of redemption. You just keep loving people and keep loving them, even though they're mistreating you. Here's the person who is a neighbor, and this person is doing something wrong to you, and all of that. Just keep being friendly. to that person. Keep loving them. Don't do anything to embarrass them. Just keep loving them. And they can't stand it too long. Oh, they react in many ways in the beginning. They react with bitterness because they're mad because you love them like that. They react with guilt feelings, and sometimes they'll hate you a little more at the transition period. But just keep loving them. And by the power of your love, they will break down under the load. That's love. You see, it's redemptive. And this is why Jesus says there's something about love that builds up and is creative. There is something about hate that tears down and is destructive. Love your enemies. Think of the weight that hating someone puts on your heart, on your mind, and on your soul. King knew what Jesus was talking about when he said, I've decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear. Hate is not what God wants filling our hearts. When we act in this way, there are plenty of people that are going to tell us we're crazy, that we shouldn't love like this. This love is not transactional. And to love this way will stun not only our enemies, but much of the world around us. It requires that we allow God's amazing and transformative grace to first work into us to release our bitterness, and then to allow that grace to flow through us, opening the door for the potential of something completely new or reconciled and transformed. Wow. To love in this way is not just an emotional response emanating from our feelings. I don't know about you, but if it's left simply up to my feelings towards someone who's hurt me, or that I've seen acting unjustly towards other, I'm going to be hard-pressed. This love takes a conscious decision to act in the best interest of another, the best interest of even our enemies. This love enables us to break the cycles of hatred and revenge. I also think of how many times we write someone off. We decide they're our enemy or we can't stand them for something that they did that was really small and really rather insignificant. Everything that happens to us doesn't rise necessarily to the level of injustice. Sometimes we forget that we're all going through something. Sometimes we need to take a step back. An elderly woman got on a bus and sat down, and a young, strong, grumpy woman got on the bus and sat beside her, bumping her and hitting her with her bags. And the elderly woman just remained silent. The young woman turned to her and asked why she hadn't complained when she got hit with these bags. And the elderly woman replied with a smile, "There's no need to be rude or discuss something so insignificant. Our journey together is so short because I'm going to get off the bus at the next stop." Well, you know, that answer could actually be written in gold letters. Sometimes there's no need to discuss something so insignificant because our journeys together are short. Each of us must understand that our time in this world is short, and that darkening it with useless arguments, jealousy, not forgiving others, discontent, bad attitudes, it's a ridiculous waste of time and energy. Remember that our journey together is short. To love like Jesus actually has the capacity to create an atmosphere where God's grace can reach even the most hardened of hearts. To add to this with the humility that Mike refers to is to acknowledge that our deepest level of our soul, that the grace we see this enemy is in need of, is the very same grace that we too have benefited from. Jesus is challenging us to redefine who our enemies are, or maybe a better way to say it is what an enemy is. In a world that is thirsty for vengeance, for getting even, and for revenge, we're invited, or maybe I should say commanded by Jesus, to be radically countercultural. What would it take for me, for you, to see our enemies not as adversaries to be conquered? Our enemies are not merely individuals who oppose or harm us. They're also human beings like us who are in desperate need of redemption and healing. These people are wounded souls desperately in need of the redemptive power of love and compassion. Close your eyes right now for a moment. Picture the person who has hurt you, the person maybe you hate, the person who is your enemy. Now picture their pain, their hurt. Maybe you don't want to, but picture them in need of love, forgiveness, healing. And now picture God saying to them, I love you. You are my precious child. It's through this lens that we can rise above our instincts of retaliation and embrace forgiveness. Now, I'm not going to kid you. This is not easy. It's not sweet and cuddly love. No, this is probably the hardest thing God ever asked us to do. Honest truth. This love is messy, it's scandalous, and I tell you, it's never convenient. I guarantee this is going to move us way out of our comfort zones. This love requires offering a radical hospitality to those who oppose us. It means extending grace when it feels undeserved and striving to find a common ground, even amongst our differences. Peter says in 1 Peter 3:9, don't repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing, because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing. As we strive to embody this countercultural love and forgiveness, as we refuse to perpetuate cycles of violence and hatred, we will become ambassadors of healing and reconciliation in the face of injustice. We then and there find the strength, the courage, the chutzpah to rise up against our instincts of retaliation and embrace forgiveness. Now, perhaps this all sounds Pollyanna, and maybe it just sounds way too difficult, or maybe it just sounds something like we're not interested in doing. But let me remind you that God wants us to do this as much for ourselves as for the other person. As I've said many times before, the unforgiving and hating heart is like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies. That's not what God wants for you or me. And it's not what God wants for our enemies, who I will remind you once again are also God's loved children, no matter what they've done to you. Jeannie and I have grown son and daughter, Ty and Tess, and when they were growing up, it hurt our hearts as parents to see them at times not getting along or acting unkindly towards the other. Sometimes one of them did something mean, cruel, or just downright stupid that hurt the other one. Even when we could see how one was wrong, our heart broke for both of them. We loved both of them, and we wanted the best for both of them. We wanted to be in a healthy relationship with each other. And we knew that would only happen through forgiveness and reconciliation. And that is how God always looks at our brokenness and our divides. God's deep desire for us is to always see the dignity and the beauty in the other person. God wants us to always want the very best for the other person. So what does this look like in real life? Margaret and Barry Meisen's 16-year-old son, Jimmy, from South London, was killed in a brutal attack in May 2008. At the time, his mother, Margaret, said, I just want to say to the parents of the other boy, I want to say I feel so sorry for them. I don't feel anger. I feel sorry for the parents. We have so many lovely memories of Jimmy, and they will just have sorrow about their son. I feel for them, I really do. People keep asking me why I'm not angry, but I say it was anger that killed my son. And if I was angry, I'd be the same as this boy. And there's too much anger in the world. On the first anniversary of the murder, of Jimmy's murder, Jimmy's father said, today for us was a message of peace, a message of change that we've been gradually working towards over the year. If the will in this country is for it, we can change. This affects everybody. If somebody's killed in our local park, in our local shop, then this affects you. We didn't just get here overnight. This problem is the result of 20 or 30 years of the way our society's been living. But we can change it. Embracing this radical love of Jesus is the only way that we will ever be able to see the sacred in the other person, no matter how different they are from us. Let's not kid ourselves. It's not easy to look at a person through the lens of Jesus' heart. especially when the pain and injustice runs deep. But it's only when we gaze deep into our enemy's soul that we will see the inherent dignity and value as a child of God created in God's image. Let us not shy away from this divine mandate, but embrace it with courage and humility. May we be known as a people who love fiercely, seek justice unwaveringly, and walk humbly with our God and with one another. And God says, it shall be so.